I'd like to start our first panel. We'll present the speakers. Actually, I'm going to ask the speakers to present themselves briefly, because you hear too much of my voice, and I'd like to balance that a bit. Dr. Wagman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shlomit Wagman. I used to head the Israeli Financial Intelligence Unit and the Israeli Privacy Protection Authority prior to that. In addition, I led the Israeli delegation to the FATF, to Egmont, to Manival, and was chair at the FATF of the Operational Working Group. I'm currently scholar, research and fellow at Harvard University, and also working in the fintech industry. And fun fact, I recently had the pleasure of testifying in the US Senate together with Dr. Levitt, which was a pleasure.
Good morning. My name is Omer Frenkel. I'm coming under two different hats to this discussion. My current position is I'm a director of intelligence solution at Cognyte, which comes under the hat of the tech provider or gives solutions around intelligence to provide to agencies to overcome the challenges that we'll discuss. And before that, I spent almost 20 years in the IDI, in the intelligence scope of the IDF, and I led for about 4 years the inter-office effort against terror funding for Hamas and for the Gaza Strip, and that will be my second hat as a former intelligence analyst. Pleasure to be here today.
Good morning. My name is Juan Montaner. I work for Chainalysis. I lead the technical team for South of Europe, Middle East, and Asia. I've been working with many governments to trace cryptocurrencies related to terrorist finance and extremism. I'm very familiar with many topics with ISIS in Africa or in Central Asia, or Hezbollah, or Iranian, or even supremacist groups in Europe. I appreciate Sharon and making the invitation. And my work on a daily basis is to support my team and governments to trace cryptocurrencies flows.
Wonderful. The title of this panel is Next Generation of Financing from Fiat to FinTech and Crypto. I'm just going to dive right into it. What we've been told, okay, and let's say by people we understand what they are talking about, is that 95, and I'm not saying this information is correct, right? But 95%, take that with a grain of salt, of flow of foreign exchange outside of Israeli shekel to the Judea and Samaria, to the Palestinian Authority, is done in, let's say, on the crypto fintech range, and in Gaza, in current Gaza, outside of the trade-based finance and the using aid as currency for, let's say, for obvious reasons, there's a lot of flow of funds through Binance and digital wallets, etc. I don't know if the statistics are correct or incorrect. What I would like to start by asking is, if you had to give a guesstimate of what percent of illicit, let's say, terror financing right now is traveling through techie, from fintech to crypto platforms. First thing that comes to your mind in terms of percentages. What would that percentage be today?
Very good question. Percentage, it's very difficult to say. I mean, I want to say, as Matthew said, bullshitting. Well, we can demonstrate in court that 300 million is being used by designated groups, 300 million, combining Hezbollah, Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other groups like Taliban in Pakistan, 300 million. But the most interesting thing is that amount is growing every day because of the cryptocurrency adoption and the generations. Of course, crypto is not used by people with 60 years old. Crypto is used by people with 20, with 21 years old. So the adoption is growing exponentially as internet. So
Omer?
Yeah, just to give my 2 cents about it. I see it a little bit differently. I think that the modus operandi or the mode of operation remain the same, meaning using Hawala, using money exchanges, using money mules, using shell companies. Dr. Levy talked about the financial committee of Hamas. I think the mode of operation remained the same. I think what changed is the technical or the technological enablers. And one of them is crypto. Under the understanding that crypto, to some extent, or in some terror groups' view, is anonymous enough for the money not to be revealed. But I think if we're still focusing on the mode of operation, in my perspective, it remained the same. The difficulty is, and as the title of this session, when we're moving from fiat or we're moving from fintech as a traditional market to a new market, I think crypto will increase over time, again, under that assumption that if you're using mixers and if you're using shapeshifters and if you're using off-chain coins or private coins, it will assist those groups to move more money. But at the end of the day, at least in the Gaza Strip, you still need hard cash to pay for something. This is why they're so hung up on the aid money, because it comes in a form of cash money. So you need still exchanges at the end to pull out that money. So I think the flow will remain the same. The amount of crypto will increase, but when we try to investigate it, or we're trying to create the follow the money trail, it will remain on the same mode of operation.
Dr. Wagman?
Thank you. I think that still the major trend is still Hawala, cash-based terror financing. However, there's a growing trend of using crypto. We don't see that much in this region, to my opinion, because it's a cash-based society. We do see, though, fundraising across the globe. But this is cases in which many times the donors do not even know where the funds are going. And I think that the fact that there are some checks and balance on the on-ramp and off-ramp creates a safer environment. However, I do want to say, if we speak about statistics, I think that the statistics provided by the blockchain analytics companies, speaking about, let's say, like 5% of illicit funds globally, it's completely misleading. If in the fiat economy, we know, the estimation about, the shadow economy is about at least 15% to 20% for tax-related reasons. How the hell can we assume that within the crypto domain it would be only one-digit number? It only means that the tools that we currently have are not sufficient, and that the blockchain analytics companies currently are able to monitor a very limited amount of the activity. But happy to get to it in a minute.
Thank you all. And I will say, if it's tempting to divide the world into black and white, right? Legal and illicit. But in reality, as we know, the gray zone is extensive. And when you have a designated entity and you can identify the wallet or the sender, easy. But forget about mixers. If you're going through 2 or 3 or 5 middlemen, if you are giving money to a charitable organization and somebody trades it, if you're sending money to a Bitcoin ATM and somebody pulls it out and you don't know who that person is. But I like your, just projecting and saying, look, if it's 15 to 20% in other fields, why would it be different in crypto wallets or in fintech? Let me dive in. Dr. Wagman, maybe we can start with you. I think you answered the first part of my question, which is, do the platforms, the blockchain platforms, the fintech platforms provide enough let's say, protection for authorities, for law enforcement, et cetera. Maybe you haven't. I would like to ask you about that. And not only a yes or no, but what can they do better? What can they do different? And where should per Matt's comments, where should the focus and attention be directed to?
Great question, thank you. As a person who was one of the architects in the FATF of actually designing the global regime of VASP, Virtual Asset Service Provider, we had this question in mind from, for the beginning, how it is possible to control this environment, this open environment, and we decided to set standards that will apply to everyone, including using the blockchain analytics system with the logic of if everything is on the blockchain, which is, by the way, much more transparent to law enforcement rather than cash, because you have the potential trails, digital trails to trace, you do need to have this industry developed. Back then it was like a dream because the technology was not exist. We see a couple of major companies that were developed that are doing blockchain analytics, which is great. However, I think that this is the time to initiate the second generation of blockchain analytics. Current companies are very limited with their abilities to trace that. Most of the investigations, to my opinion, are forensic and retrospectively. They do not prevent the activities when it happens. We should move and switch to the second generation of blockchain analytics, which include real-time monitoring, prevention of illicit activities, also doing some monitoring on DeFi and stable coins, which are actually merging with the traditional economy, and I'm saying that as an expert on fintech that actually wants to work with those platforms, and to look on the ecosystem much more broadly and look for clusters and patterns. When I see an Iranian network working and operating, a VASP, a singular VASP, will never be able to identify that they were used or misused by this Iranian network, because the method of operation is so complex, and there are so many, as you mentioned, middlemen and stop and layers, that they will never be able, with the current tools, even going back 7 hoops, 10 hoops, 15 hoops, they will never be able to do the analysis that is required. Therefore, they have to move to a much more mature approach that looks from the beginning on the clusters and know how to identify them, and be able to understand that this is also cross platforms. Also PPP, public-private partnership, is required to share this information.
If I can just build,
Please.
we should hire you in Cognyte, because because I think that's exactly the approach, the technological approach that I think the industry is going. When I say industry, it's the technological industry, but also governmental agencies. The understanding that working in a single domain, in this case crypto, won't be enough. So we're talking about fusion. We're talking about the ability to take data providers, financial data providers. We're talking about taking OSINT in general, company registries. We're talking about shifting our SIGINT, our communication interception into this area, our IP interception. And then you might have the chance to understand not just the specific sender or the specific wallet. You will be able to do full de-anonymization of that specific activity and the network associated with it. I think agencies have invested highly in the past 15 years in procuring a lot of endpoint solutions, each one for specific domain. Chainalysis did the fantastic work, in my view, in working on the blockchain and giving their labeling from open source about specific transactions, about specific wallets. But that on its own is not enough anymore. And I think consolidating everything, centralizing everything into a fusion capability that gives the analyst at the end, and it doesn't matter if he's proficient in crypto or if proficient in financial investigations, the ability to get the full view in one location, let the data talk, and not just one aspect of the data talk. I think that will be the ultimate resolution.
Thank you for that. Juan, I forgot to congratulate you. Chainalysis recently bought 2 companies in Israel and opened an office here.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Mazel Tov. Let's ask, I want to ask you maybe maybe a more, I wouldn't say a more robust question. How do these organizations even transfer money through these platforms? You have an overview of, a significant overview over the blockchain. How do these guys operate? What do they do?
Of course, there are many groups, many individuals, but at the end, like in the financial system, they need liquidity. To have that liquidity, they have to go to people or companies with big liquidity, like big exchanges. They use fake IDs, or they use intermediaries, hawalers, because if you take in the platform any hawaler, there is a big exposure to big brands, big exchanges. The big exchanges, they don't know if that user, that business account, is using crypto for financing their communities, or for terrorist finance, or for double-use goods. I have to say that we see crypto today, this morning, is 4 trillion market cap, 4 trillion, which is a lot. Of course, as I said before, we have 300 million designated to terrorist finance. However, there are many wallets, like what the American says, walk like a duck, I speak like a duck. There are more than 2,000 wallets, in total 5 billion. They're likely to be related to terrorist finance. And CENTEF in Israel is discovering some of them every month, every quarter. However, as Matthew says, this is intelligence, but how we put it in the law enforcement's hands, in the justice, to block, to say to the big exchanges, block these users. But at the end is a small hawalers, that shadow banking, that they come to the big brands to get that liquidity.
Dr. Wagman, I have to ask you, having been both on the regulators' side and in the private sector, seeing kind of the different points of view, and this is me going off script, but I'm very interested. Let me ask it differently. When you go on when you're a company, you have a business plan. When you are a military force, you have a plan of action and you use your maps and your intel, etc. What is the map or the roadmap that the government and the private sector, be it in Israel or outside of Israel, I know you've just come back from Boston recently, what is the roadmap that we're using? What are the maps that we're using to even know that we're seeing the full picture?
So that's a great question. I think that, the risk assessment, the understanding of what the threats are, is the major stone that every organization and government have to work by and understand. And in order to do that, when I was in government, one of my mandate was, let's conduct a comprehensive risk assessment nationally and understand what our risks are to be able to address them. And then you are prioritizing them, trying to collect data from private sector and create the full picture. You never know the full picture. Same happens at the private sector. In the payment company that I've been working at, you try to understand who is misusing you. And the best way of doing that, again, is technology. You must adopt the most advanced technology and adopt the approach of looking at clusters and patterns, not particular use cases. Many times when I was sitting with the police, when I'm sitting with regulators, other colleague regulators, or in the private sector, people give you a handful of cases and saying, this is the trend. And I keep saying, no, this is what you looked at and you found those results, but you have to look more broadly. And technology, and if we speak here about blockchain, is a great example. When you're doing zoom out, when you look on the entire ocean from above and look for trends in purpose, like look for trends and patterns, you can actually gain much broader insights. And in order to do that, all of those entities have to use first visualization technology and advanced technology. And you'll be surprised to what extent organizations do not use that and do not adapt that. Luckily today with AI, we have better accessibility to that. So even smaller organization or less sophisticated organization are able to conduct deep view and deep dive into this data, but it's still not enough. And I keep telling all the time the teams that I'm working with, let's look at the ocean and try to understand the trends. Then you'll be able to find the path to go.
Omer, I'm going to take half a step back and then go two steps in. When you look at global economy, right, you look at macro, you look at flow of funds between countries, you look at trade deficits. Sometimes, if you know as a regulator that country X exported $10 billion worth of something into country Y, and country Y you only see $8 billion worth of import, so you understand there's a gap. You know more or less what you're looking for. You were alluding to having let's say, a broader view and amalgamating the different platforms and technologies in order to gain the full picture. How should one, or if we have in the audience sitting with us, let's say there was such a person, the person who is the overseer of financial warfare or counter warfare in this country, what would your advice be to them, and what systems would you recommend? Forget the names, but how do systems that they should be looking at, what should their dashboard be looking like? What systems they should be using? How does that even look like to see the full picture?
I'll divide the answer into a few sections. One, we need to reduce the barrier of getting into this domain. Dr. Levit talked about that billions are interested in money, but nobody understands terror financing. I think when I was an analyst and I did my onboarding or wrapping up to be an analyst, nobody taught me about finance. Or nobody taught me how to read a spreadsheet. And I think that barrier prevents intelligence analysts from diving in and be as professional as they can be in this domain. So I'm not coming to educate or to preach to other agencies how they should do their ramping up and onboarding. What I am saying is that we need to, through technology, reduce that barrier. How can we reduce that barrier? For a few items. One, as Shlomit mentioned, is visualization. Being able to do a simplified visualization of how the money is being moved between the different, we call them entities. But an entity can be a person, can be a company, can be a phone, can be a digital wallet, can be a transaction, can be many things. Second, we want to enable the analyst to ask or to query the data in a natural manner, meaning I don't want the analyst to only if he has an MBA from Wharton to be able to query financial data. Even if he can't do it, if he doesn't have the proficiency to do it, he needs to ask in a natural manner, for example, like ChatGPT-like or co-piloting-like, and the system or the solution will still understand what he's asking and will translate it to the financial aspect. That's another way to move. And the third one is through machine learning. And I think when we're talking about AI, we'll keep thinking about, I don't know, usually about chatbots to some extent. But I think machine learning, which is a subset of AI, is hardly ever used. One, because people are afraid of black boxes. Second, people are saying, why should I rely on an output that I didn't filter on my own? But I think machine learning, if you're working with the customer, with the end user, on the relevant parameters, what are the attributes that are relevant to you? What is the data set that is already tagged, and you're rest assured that the training set is relevant? Then I think, at least for the prioritization part, the risk assigning part, I think that can dramatically accelerate the way that we're processing the data. Because if I'll just look at a list of 10,000 wallets, it's somewhat of a gamble. What should I start with? But if I'm getting a score, and that score relies not only on the crypto data, it relies, as I said, on communication behavior, on social media activity, on geographical anchors, on financial data from providers, on open source that comes from news sites like Bloomberg, for example, then that prioritization is much more intelligent than the single analyst. Usually when we pitch it to end users, we're saying, listen, if I'll put an analyst and the machine learning on a single item, on a single wallet, let's say, the analyst will do a much better work. right? He has the familiarity, he has the expertise, he will get the job done. But when I'm working in multipliers, and now it's 10,000 wallets against a single analyst, machine learning, although it's statistical, will still prevail. And I think the more that we'll integrate machine learning, which is specific to the end user, specific to their flows, to their investigation steps, I think we'll have a better chance in overcoming that barrier.
20-second advertisement break. We're building, CENTEF is building an agent like that for all our information. So if anyone would like access to that agent, the AI agent that sits on our platforms, reach out to one of the team and we're happy to bring you in on the pilot.
I'll just interrupt for 30 seconds. From my experience, I agree with most of what you said, but other than the bottom line, from my experience, AI agents are working better than analysts. They are working better, they're making less mistakes, and they're learning very fast. And you're able to scale up in everything that is related to the financial ecosystem very quickly and rapidly if you know how to prompt that properly. If you want to learn more, happy in the break.
Last question to Juan, and we'll conclude this fascinating panel. Juan, I don't want to ask you, if we look at a heat map of the world, I don't want to ask you what are the hotspots. I want to ask you what areas that we're not looking at enough we should be looking at.
Well, I mean, when we think cryptocurrencies, we think something abstract in the cyberspace, but we're talking digital dollars, okay? Which countries, they need digital dollars at the end? Well, the 80%, 85% of the crypto transactions under $500 are in Africa. If we see the Sahel, we get Somalia, Ethiopia, all the Sahel countries, it's the biggest spot. Because there's not banking footprint, there are not many FIUs, there are not many enforcement, because at the end they need money in. So crypto is part of their own economy, and it's using for everything. A lot for legitimate, but there is a lot for money laundering. So Africa is the biggest spot.
If I just may add, I think that it's not necessarily geographic, but actually payments means. And we see that coins that are less supervised or less monitored by the blockchain analytics companies are those that are being most used by criminals and terrorists to fund. And for example, USDC versus USDT. USDT, in which the confiscation abilities are more limited than USDT for a variety of reasons, we'll not get to them into here, is being used dramatically more by criminals. So they know how to find those loopholes, and they're going after them. If we speak about Hamas, once they realize that law enforcement are very good at tracing Bitcoin, they actually approach their donors and publicly released a message saying, do not donate any longer with Bitcoin, but let's move to another one. It was Tron in that case, which was less supervised and so forth. So they are very sophisticated, and it's not necessarily not only geographically, but also based on the monitoring capabilities of authorities, which means that it is efficient after all, perhaps, to be more optimistic, that the FATF standards and the global regulation is effective, and we know how to enforce that, and if and when countries are collaborating, which is also something that needs to be improved, then there is an enforcement, an effective enforcement.
And we know that money is like water. It's not, you can't just block it. People need resources, they will find a way. If you close the door, they'll go through the window. You close the window, they'll go through the cracks in the floor.
It's normal. It's normal. Yeah.
It's just normal. And there's always the tension, Juan, we spoke about it, between do you want to block or do you want to supervise and understand what's going on? But that's maybe for a different discussion. With that, thank you to these wonderful panelists.
And Mikey.
Thank you.